So, just a few words of introduction uh, to Doug. Doug is the son of two architects, and trained to be an architect. Did his degree, very accomplished as a designer. Has done many buildings, and has started recently to do some photographs and video work, which people are acknowledging has some sort of connection to architecture. He's recently been denying that his parents are architects, that he is an architect, and that secretly always wanted to be in an architecture school like this one. He has done an incredibly efficient job at producing the image of himself as an artist whose work has a connection to architecture. And to my knowledge, there's not a single person that really fully understands that he's an architect. Raises the question, what is an architect? An architect is, I guess, somebody who's in love with the built environment, which means an architect is somebody who doesn't know what buildings are. And schools of architecture are therefore places for people who don't know what buildings are, which is a minority. The majority knows that a bathroom, for example, is for the body. For an architect, a bathroom is a representation of contemporary society and is something to think about. So for the architect, the built environment is absolutely filled with questions and mysteries, and it is something to be researched and investigated. And for human beings, the built environment is something to use. And in every aspect of Doug's work, the built environment is made into a question, and you have to ask yourself, what is it, the space that you are normally in? There is something very normal about everything that you will see, and in an uncanny way, the normality of it starts to get sort of annoying in a way. And it's in that sense that this is very much an architect, and I really welcome you to the school as a colleague, as a fellow victim of the built environment. Doug.
This is it over here, huh? Thank you for that. I feel like J.G. Ballard just did a biography. It's great to be here and to talk to you. And unfortunately, my parents weren't architects, they're drifters. Fortunately, they're drifters. I think in many ways, I've kind of stumbled onto an interest in form and interaction, probably in different ways than classical means. What I'd like to do tonight is to just do a kind of quick walkthrough through some past projects up to current things which are on the drawing board. And I want to take it to this image here, which is kind of a ground zero for me. This was a work which I did in 1996, and it was the first piece where I really want to take, I want to use film to really kind of explore a landscape, a topography. In this work, Diamond Sea, we found this region in southern Namibia. It was about 80,000 square kilometers, and we spent about 2 months there. And I wanted to see if the electric fences, the ocean that surrounded this space, which was just raw gem diamond mining, could create its own narrative of sorts. And really, it was kind of an exorcism of the landscape. I wanted to also see if it's possible for film to kind of fragment, to break apart, to express the nonlinearity of this landscape. Here you see Ghost Town in Coleman Scoop from 1907, I believe. There were certain moments where you come across these instances where you just find architecture sitting in the desert, frozen in time, opera halls being slowly filled with sand. This was an installation in Chelsea, I think, at that time. Another piece, Restless Minds, which worked with rural farm auctioneers from the Midwest and the Appalachians. I kind of brought them out of their podium like I'm standing at now, speaking their incredibly rapid, accelerated language, and kind of put them into the parking lots of 7-Elevens and mini malls and convention centers and just everywhere and anywhere and just kind of let them roam free. A different build environment. Another piece here, Eraser, which was shot in Montserrat Island. As the island erupted with pyroclastic flows, we were able to very quickly make a move on it and to go to neighboring island, kind of get a boat over and smuggle ourselves onto Montserrat. And with this work, conceptually, I wanted to create an installation which followed this almost invisibly straight line due north-south on the island. And I saw this island as a kind of this line and this island as a gradient into minimalism. The northernmost sector of the island was very jungly, very lush, very tropical. It was rather untouched from the eruptions. However, as you went increasingly south, you would go into the city called, I think it's called Plymouth, where there was ATMs and the Rolling Stones recorded as studio, and it was just kind of frozen in time in this very odd and haunting way. Eventually, the piece went up the foothills of the Soufrières volcano you see in the background here, and I was attracted to this idea that there was a place on Earth that was a complete equilibrium, a neutrality, a space of not black or white, but kind of medium gray. And there was this kind of cloud of heated ash that it never left the rim of the volcano, and it was metallic. It was almost had a silver quality to it. So the piece eventually kind of goes into that and vanishes. Another work shot in Jonestown, Guyana, where the People's Temple massacre took place in 1978. I think it was 823 people perished over 24 hours. And with this work, we, once again, these early works were very involved in a kind of use of the landscape, a kind of psychological landscape, an exorcism of the landscape. In this work, we wanted to kind of stay in this location until a monsoon hit and just let the shifting and changing of the weather, the red ants taking pieces of leaves away, all these things become the narrative, a kind of narrative of disappearance, you could say. So details from it. A piece shot in Bollywood in 1998. We spent a while kind of inside the Indian film industry in Mumbai. And with this work, I wanted to really find a way to explore every mechanism, every gear, every rope that kind of created this world of illusions. At that time, Bollywood was creating films with the largest distribution, the largest gross of any place on earth. So I was very invested in this idea of what is the purest form of communication, and can one go and really look at this as a larger mechanism, going beyond the stars like Amitabh Bachchan or Amir Khan and saying what is the system itself and how does it work? How can a graphic narrative be created so perfectly to communicate with often very illiterate audience? So that was, I think the installation itself premiered in London. There were 2 or 3 tons of red earth that created the floor. The walls were a kind of raw canvas, and it actually created a form of humidity inside the gallery space, which was kind of nice. People would walk in, and this red soil would get on their feet, and then they'd go walking around Cork Street, this really kind of stuck-up neighborhood, and they'd track it into jewelry shops and bars and restaurants. And there was one point where I could see where my piece had gone because I'd see these red footprints going all the way around the block, and it was kind of nice. I wear these shoes. I love these shoes. I've had them retreaded maybe 3 or 4 times, and I still have some red soil on them. So it's a little souvenir. You've got to be in touch with the earth. This is the earth also. This is a new earth. And this is electric earth. This is a piece which is I think it's at the Whitney now. But the work I made in, I think, 99. And at the time, I was very interested in this idea of acceleration. I was this idea of how does one synchronize with the environment, with the built environment, and at other times recognize when the synchronicity falls out and one is left desperately behind. In this work, it stars a lone protagonist that you see here. And this person is watching television. It goes to white snow, white noise. He kind of surfaces in this almost dreamlike state and walks outside and realizes or recognizes that he's perhaps the last person on Earth. And as he's on walkabout, on this sort of urban walkabout through the city streets, we see that gradually all forms of electricity are pulsing and moving and kind of creating their own rhythms. This happens at different tempos, whether it's passing a car wash and the foam kind of coming out of the brushes or lights flickering, all of these things. And they start kind of going into his binary system, his movements, his pulses, the tempo in which he walks and moves, and which often becomes very accelerated. I think here you see a dollar bill stuck in a Coca-Cola machine. There is a Coke and a Pepsi machine side by side, and he chose Coke. And the bill just goes in this perpetual loop back and forth, creating this kind of mechanical rhythmic sound, and you find his body kind of caught in the system. Eventually, I think in the work, I've seen here, this might be the Venice Biennale or the Stedelijk Museum. Eventually, the kind of surrounding environments move so fast, he kind of merges with it and eventually is kind of bypassed. But maybe see the work for yourself, because I'm probably totally wrong about my interpretation. There's stills from it. And I guess, when I look at these images, I don't really have a speech or a lecture or anything per se, but I just kind of look at these images and talk about them. And I find that in many ways there's this kind of sense of repetition that I'm very attracted to. The concept of repetition, patterns and repetition. Here you see this countdown from a filling station. When I was doing that, when I was working on Electric Earth, it was a very interesting moment for me. There was a curator who is now deceased called Harold Zeman, who curated several Venice Biennales and some amazing shows in the early 70s. And Harold said, I want you to do something for this, but just go away and let's talk in a month and tell me what you want to do. And I found that it was this very interesting moment to step away and just find a studio space that was just concrete floors, white walls, nothing in it, a couple jugs of water. And I had read once that Bruce Nauman had given himself 3 weeks for one idea. And at the end of the third week, if the idea didn't have something kind of tactile and tangible to work with, he would erase it and move on. And I just kind of put myself in this self-imposed exile, and I recognized that I wanted to make 3 concepts a day that were fully fleshed out. And on a creative level, it was very interesting because you found that after 5 or 6 days, that 15, 30 ideas or something, things start becoming like very loose, and the preciousness of a concept just vanishes. And this was one of the sketches I had when I was in that phase, and I made a year or two later where I wanted to swim from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean and swim the Panama Canal to try to connect this idea of space and kind of bridge these ideas. But exhibition in Japan, architecture, some kind of form of architecture here. I don't know what it is. It's the outside of a piece called Ayaminyu at the Kunstwerke in Berlin. This piece, it was very important to have an exterior and interior that had a relationship. This is the interior space. With this work, it was a kind of story of a young girl who's kind of at this moment where everything is completely new, and it's going through 24 hours in her life. And everything becomes this kind of fictional, non-fictional experience, this cycle of experiences until she falls asleep. And as she's sleeping, the house that she's in, the foundations are severed, the house is lifted up, it's put on a flatbed trailer, and it's taken off onto the freeway, and it kind of vanishes with her inside. So I actually wanted to make a container itself for the installation that never really touched the museum that it was exhibited in. Below Debris, another work. I spent about a year working in the Mojave Desert with a group of squatters in a place called the Salton Sea. There's an area there called Slabsville, which, considering the current economic situation, you all want to move there because there's no tax. It's a very strange parcel of desert land, and kind of worked with the people there and eventually created this work, which went from individuals in this kind of very barren landscape to bringing them into these suburbs and to eventually the suburban houses disintegrating and exploding into dust. Here's an image shot from a helicopter. This was a piece of a woman losing her sight, but trying to kind of gain as much knowledge as she could within the time which her visuals are erasing. It became this kind of screen, this kind of bisecting screen. This piece, this is an exhibition at the Serpentine Gallery in London. And going back to the architecture the W, the architecture W. In this, is this an architecture school? I don't even know. This exhibition, this space was a place that I'd always liked very much, but it was very formal and it was very kind of controlled and contained. And it's great for like a painting show, like a Bridget Riley show or something. And I found myself suddenly, struggling with how to work with this and wondering what the options were. So I recognized that maybe it'd be more interesting if the viewer entered the space and immediately were denied access to the gallery, the central gallery, but it had to go underground. So they had to we kind of cut and opened up the entrance floor and created these steps. And we recognized that underground was the central heating and cooling for Hyde Park and the space itself. And it was this very kind of like modern and surreal and clean and chrome space, very cold. And so that was really the first piece that you ran across. Here you see it. And then you kind of ascended into the gallery space, which was very dark and closed. Outside in the turret, we created a kind of searchlight that scanned the park all night. And the works inside were shot in different places. The title of the exhibition was called New Ocean, and it dealt with this idea of a kind of continuous flow of information, reference, fiction, nonfiction, this idea of a kind of topography that couldn't be contained. This was something shot in Alaska, which was part of it. There's other elements. The exhibition traveled to quite a few museums over about a 2-year span, and I was very frustrated with this idea of a traveling art exhibition, how contained they are. So I wanted to create this criteria where the exhibition would start in this one way, which I just showed you, and all of the works by the end of this show, by the end of the tour, would be radically different, almost completely different. So we would remix pieces or add different footage or change the architecture of the screens. This was in Kunsthaus Bregenz, designed by Peter Zumthor. And once again, here we wanted to create kind of a secession from the exhibition architecture to create, in this instance, this kind of 360-degree room. And I think this was a shot at Iguazu Falls in Argentina, which just appears like this hole in the earth. It's this kind of deep crevasse with falling water. Yeah, books. We love books. We love printed matter. I love printed matter, and I can't get enough of it. And I think we should all work to save books. What a stupid thing to say, but really, come on. And this was one of the artist books that I'd made a while back, and I wanted to see if it was possible to make a book as a film, but a film that never existed as a film. So I worked with this actor, a German actor, Udo Kier, and Udo has always been one of my favorites, ever since Warhol's Dracula to Breaking the Waves. And in this story, he was a kind of businessman who's always on the road and eventually tests his limits of nomadicism and finds himself every day, every night in a different hotel. Eventually, he transforms into the hotel itself. He becomes dematerial, the doorknob, the phone, the walls, the carpet, everything. Different people in his life kind of pass through without knowing. The Vienna Secession. Did an exhibition inside, but I thought it might be nice if the museum never slept, because these closing hours are so detrimental to an exhibition, the idea that a show closes at 5 or 6. So it became a kind of insomnia show, like every time these eyes shut, a different set of eyes opened, and it just kind of ran perpetually through the cold nights as joggers passed and had fleeting eye contact. Inside a piece, Hysteria. It's a Mies van der Rohe Pavilion in Barcelona. I had a chance to do a project there, and I didn't really want to do something that was aggressively visual. So instead, I took an approach of doing a sound work, and we created this mobile, which moved on silent motors. And from each of the kind of pads that you see, there's different elements of parabolic sound that showers down into the viewer underneath. The sound was very specific fragments of conversations that had been scripted. The speakers were highly directional, so every time you kind of encountered it, you would come up with a different experience or interpretation, very much akin to Robert Altman's Nashville. And this baby stroller is really something, huh? The Spanish really know how to design. This is another sound piece in Bregenz. We had this really strange thing that happened here. I think it was the opening, and the curator came up and said, there was this older gentleman that would like to talk to you. And I said, yeah, sure. He said he has some questions about this work, this audio work, and he was, maybe standing over here. And I talked to him, and in this broken English, he said, is this work supposed to make me aroused? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, because I'm becoming very stimulated, sexually stimulated by having this voice in my head. And then I knew that maybe the work had kind of backfired and done something right. This is a workshop we did. I'm not much of a teacher, but I do very much enjoy doing workshops in different places. In this situation, it was in Grenoble in France and at Beaux-Arts. And I got to this school, and it was really kind of frustrating. It was kids just with black turtlenecks, kind of chain smoking. There was no dialogue between anyone. And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of amazing if we could just really break free of this place? And so I asked the guy that was running the school, I said, can we get a helicopter tomorrow morning? And I think he thought that I wanted to leave with the helicopter, so he was kind of reluctant. But I convinced him, and the next morning we kind of got these students and drove very far into the mountains and got to a place with no representational imagery where everything was just white, and hiked down into this valley, and these kids are kind of saying, what are we doing now? And I said, you've got to you've just got to talk to each other, So it kind of, everything just broke free, and all of a sudden there's this dialogue, and it was kind of beautiful and awkward at the same time. And at that moment, this helicopter kind of came over the Alps and hovered above them like some scene from, I don't know, like Apocalypse Now redo. And gradually it landed, and it took each person into the air to kind of fly above everyone else. So it kind of became this performance in a certain way. I guess this was a little experiment at the studio of building a city, and these were some sketches of different forms of architecture. And then we hand built it into these architectural models using FedEx supplies, which is kind of great because in this recession era, you can call 1-800-GO-FedEx, and they'll bring this material to you for free to work with. The work, it took several months to build, and then it became an aviary at the studio. And you can see different kind of American indigenous birds that are nesting here. Different project in France, the Arc, I think, Arc. It was a very old museum, and we didn't want to touch the museum. We wanted the exhibition to just kind of land. So that's what's happening here. And the idea kind of sped up. I like photography very much, and these are kind of images that I just try to collect in my travels, but I find these certain repetitious moments, yet even though these images may span 5 or 10 years, there's this kind of strange tempo that's created of solitude. This is a work, The Moment, and this work had, I think, about 12 or 15 monitors, many different characters, all kind of going through the same choreographed repetitious movements, the same camera angles, and it created this kind of large snaking S. Each floating monitor had a mirror behind it, so it created this kind of almost like a light train of moving images. It was an investigation into banality. I wanted to find these very kind of unrecorded daily moments and explore them and exploit them to make this work. Interiors, work with 4 stories in different parts of the world. Everything from over on the right here, you see a character played by the musician Andre 3000, filmed in Compton and Watts. His character's kind of going about his own business until he suddenly kind of finds this tempo. Someone else on the left in the Yokohama market at 4 a.m. Other characters. And the piece never, the piece is designed in such a way where the combinations of characters always come up different. I think it was an early experiment for me in working with chaos theory in terms of narrative structure. One of the stills from it. I think this is also in Bregenz. But you can see, that might be you, Brian, sitting on that bench. The work used double-sided screens and then kind of translucent scrims to create this kind of floating architectural effect. So a book. I try to do a book or two a year. I'm addicted to the format. This specific project was something where I'd been so deep in making these projects I'm explaining that I wanted to pull out and really kind of look at a larger community and a larger dialogue. And at this point, I was working very much with the narrative and breaking the narrative and looking for different structures. And I found that, it was really a moment where, if you look at the 20th century and you see how many movements have been kind of created, possibly even created by critics alone, whether it's pop or Dada. And I kind of recognize that right now, there's very few movements, but there's more threads. And these threads, they kind of weave from medium to medium, whether it's architecture, whether it's sound or performance or something like that. And with this project, I was able to really kind of collect all of these different voices. We had a beautiful conversation with Robert Altman before he passed away, or Bruce Conner. Bruce Conner, I think, has probably made the greatest work of the 20th century. But then on the flip side of that, someone who you might find here like Olafur Rem. So it was very interesting kind of, going into that place and looking at how many people are struggling and working with the same idea of fragmentation, essentially. This turned into some happenings. I'm going to go over that ridiculous photo quickly. On the West Coast and East Coast. Here's a slide that's in the wrong place, a table. It's a sonic table we have for when conversations get too boring and you want to let sound take over. And here it's being played at MoMA. The table is an artwork that just came out of literally a dinner. Is sitting at this dinner surrounded by people that you just could feel language breaking down. So I thought that it would be nice if you could kind of just pull your plate aside and play and make some kind of music, make some kind of harmony that everyone could join into, and it could become violent or harmonious or whatnot. This MoMA happening, I think there was some live auctioneers in the audience that kind of chimed in. The musician Cat Power played. Here's one of our crazy people that we love, Ready to Explode. I found myself one night in Midtown at a restaurant, and I was leaving. It was quite late, and I was alone, walking onto the street, and it was cold. I looked at the buildings, this kind of incredible vertical space that you see in Midtown Manhattan, and I just kind of had this hallucination or vision that the buildings started to communicate with each other, and the content, the daily lives and the moments inside started to kind of turn inside out and become amplified and kind of hyper real. And I got home late, and I think drew this on a napkin, and eventually we started researching ways to make this possible. And some of the images here are just kind of different explorations into the idea of New York when I was developing this. This was, I think, different flights that traverse above the city. This was possible air rights that are still available. And eventually, the piece became this work, Sleepwalkers. Sleepwalkers is a piece which has multiple characters shot in different parts of the wider city. These characters are not so much about individuals or the specific people's identity, but they're more about a larger fabric of movement and pulsing and ebbing and flowing. And I think in these images, here you see Sean Marshall. In her role, she was a kind of worker at this postal facility in Queens. It was this amazing symmetrical place. She's handling like thousands and thousands of letters a day, these handwritten letters, and they're going through different processors and sifting plants, all very kind of mechanized. Yet she kind of comes across in the work as someone who's drifting through town, someone who's going to kind of, know you and leave you. And, you would find, let's see, there's a black slide there. Someone else, this character who was played by Donald Sutherland, I wanted to use someone who was instantly recognizable for this, because I wanted to have this character, this graphic character, as someone who is completely trapped by his fame and notoriety, and had basically kind of lives his life inside a Lincoln Town Car with the windows rolled up, impenetrable to the outside world. The work itself explored different parts of the Museum of Modern Art, and kind of cascaded down 53rd and 54th Street and sections of 6th Avenue. And it was very strange. It was a fascinating experience making the work, but it was very strange and interesting seeing how people would come across it. And I loved it when people came across it in a random way. There was a moment for me that was really kind of the climax of the entire project when I was walking down 54th Street late at night. I just wanted to check in on a projector or something like that, and it was freezing, and there was a doorman. I could tell this guy he was cold and miserable, and he's been sitting out there, and this taxi pulls up, and the taxi driver was a friend of his, and the driver pulls up and kind of rolls down his window, and he says, hey, how you doing tonight? And the guy says, pretty good. And then the taxi driver looks over, and he kind of points to the facade, and he says, hey, hold on, this is my favorite part, watch this. And it was more than I could have hoped for. So different scenes and angles. We really tried to kind of develop our own visual palette for the work. In terms of lighting, we created different neon identities for each character that could abstract different things like that, different color palettes in a kind of Storaro-like way. What else? This is an amazing guy. If you ever see him on the subway, his name's Larry Wright. He's the most legendary subway drummer, kind of the inventor of the bucket style. He started playing in the subways when he was about 7. The cut on his cheek is from the razor that he keeps inside his mouth all the time, the one-sided razor which he spits out when he's in altercations. Photographic show. Recently in Switzerland, I wanted to just go through all these images and create a gradient of different places in the world, different locations, but kind of align it to dark to light. And it becomes this kind of 21st century hyperscape, if that's a word. This is a work that I did not long after Sleepwalkers, and Sleepwalkers was something which was so aggressively urban for me. And a short time after that, these collectors that were developing a space, a kind of DIA-like space in upstate New York, so would you like to come up and present something or think of an idea to do here, some kind of permanent work? And I went there, and it was incredibly beautiful nature. It was stunning, and I said to this person I was with that I would rather forfeit doing something and just you leave it the way it is. And we spoke, and I asked him what plans they had for building anything, and they said that we're going to build this one structure, a very minimal kind of rectangular volume that will eventually will go from being a kind of residence to a museum given to a trust to the state of New York or something. So I investigated that, and I had this idea that maybe we could take the one structure in this landscape and make it vanish, make this house or building disappear. So we tried to kind of procrastinate the construction of it. We started filming before anything was built, and we filmed all the sight lines of where this structure would be viewed from, with the kind of optics, the optical millimeter that would be similar to how a person might perceive it. We filmed all angles in all seasons, all 4 seasons. So essentially the house could become this kind of hologram of its own disappearance. However, as that process began and continued, I found myself becoming more and more curious by this idea of the time itself, the expansion and contraction that this holographic house could contain. So we found ourselves also filming on more and more of a macro and a micro level, and also exploring the surrounding topography and kind of breaking the time code of seasons. So at times you would have a burning Indian summer as you're standing in a snowbank in December. So that's a little bit of what's going on here. Smoke signals. This is just a great photo, isn't it, right? This man's smoking. And this kind of comes to another project where we've been trying to create a cloud for the last year and a half at the studio. We're experimenting with different forms of steam and mist and different tests. And this kind of has a future home that we're building it for. But essentially, the piece should be a kind of translucent, transparent sculpture, or a form which can be choreographed. I want to have something which can become like very, very transparent, and then it can become very articulated. It can move and flow and never be repeatable. This is another project in Tribeca, and it was a similar situation where someone said, "We have this building. Is there anything you want to do?" And I walked up to the top of the water tower here, and I just saw this incredible view, and I said, why don't we find a way to get away from the banality of the window views from side to side and find a way to pour the city into the building like a waterfall. So we created a series of 3 to 4 story skylights that were periscopes that then turned into kaleidoscopic shafts that poured reflected light from floor to floor. In certain areas you can walk through it, other areas they shower light and reflection above you. Here's one in production here. There's 3 that were all different geometries. This is a room of 6,000 moving mirrors that move with your own rhythm as you're kind of walking through it. And this is a graduate of your school who works at the studio. An opera that we're doing right now. We'll be in Basel in a few months. This is a kind of the silent chamber, the silent pavilion, to be more specific. It's this completely mirrored space which you go into, and no sound can enter, and there's no reflective sound. And it serves to create a very specific aperture into the landscape. I wanted to create a perceptual space where this one level of consciousness could be pulled away and could thrust you uncomfortably at first into very much the present, a space which allows you to really look at exactly what is happening without the distractions of memories or anything else. So for this, we're working on doing one of these right now in the Agradunes in Switzerland. This little book, write in Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown was a California governor at a very young age, just the youngest age in American history, political history in California. I did this book on him in 1976, and we went through all of his speeches, and we pulled just these kind of very specific sound bites that dealt with a kind of ideology, a kind of very realistic yet quite idealistic ideology that he had at the time. He was someone who refused to live in the governor's mansion, stayed on a futon in his $600 apartment. He didn't take a raise. All these things like that made more state parks. And anyways, basically we created this kind of experimental book that could be folded in many directions. One side was all this propaganda from 1976, and the other side we tracked him down now and had a conversation with him now about the same ideological questions. So it's kind of an experiment. It's an investigation into time and how time affects one's personal beliefs, I guess you could say. And it's a project in Arles, France that we're halfway done filming. After Sleepwalkers and the project in Upstate, I wanted to secede from any formal architecture and try to do a work which could exist in different places, in different city places, but could be freestanding and wouldn't have a kind of rigid formal structure, a rigid permanent structure. It will be a permanent piece in Arles for about, I think, 4 or 5 years, and then will be housed by this museum that Gary's building. The piece itself, however, unfortunately I don't have any drawings here. The piece itself comes out of a very specific landscape. It's kind of a 21st century earthwork. It takes this landscape like a sheet of paper and starts to fold it in like origami. And then if you fold it in, you have form. If you unfold it, you have creases. And these creases all create different narratives. So a different part of narrative is filmed in each section of the Camargue. This area of the Camargue is it's a very like raw, wild section of France, something with wild horses and kind of strange salt mines, salt mountains, estuaries. It's a different project. Right now we're trying to propose to do a temporary installation on the Hollywood sign, where I'd like to turn the Hollywood sign into a mirror that reflects the city. It's cantilevers out and reflects the city back into it. So at certain times of day it becomes a hole in the mountain in the Hollywood Hills, and other times it becomes this kind of mirrored and warped reflection of the city itself, depending on perspective lines. This work, the Sonic Pavilion, is something under construction in Brazil right now. The pavilion goes 900 feet into the earth. A hole goes 900 feet, and then at the bottom of this are a series of sensors and geomics. These sounds then amplify and transmit the sound of the tectonic plates moving and any kind of deep earth sound into the pavilion. The pavilion is outfitted with a number of speakers which are relatively hidden within the formal architecture. It's a 360-degree curved glass which kind of allows this view out into the region. These are pretty early. It's gone quite further by now, I think. And you kind of hike up underground and spiral into it here. Also in this location, we're creating another room, and this room is several stories high, and it's completely white, and it's very, very specific, very measured, and it's much darker than this rendering. This is also the Columbia guy here. We photographed him in the parking lot. And the wall is it's entirely shear cut earth into the hillside. And I wanted to kind of make this earth wall that could at times bleed moisture, other times in other seasons become dry and cracked, but had a very silk smooth kind of finish to it, and not be protected by glass or anything like that. I wanted the rawness. Different angles of the pavilion as planned for the Alps, the Sonic Pavilion. Yeah, and is that it? No. There's images and images. Tell me if you want me to stop. I don't want to kill you guys with these images. Installation at 303 Gallery from October. The show lasted in two separate spaces. In this space, I wanted to return to watercolors. I wanted to go back to something that was like very handmade. I grew up drawing and painting and illustrated for a living to support my fine art when I first moved to New York. So in this space, I think you had about like 50 watercolors that were very dense perspectives, multi-layered perspectives. With this specific project, I wanted to create something that had no beginning and no end, no entry point like traditional image making, where you have a first, second, third read to allow you into a graphic. So instead, I saw it as this kind of continuum. And I found myself looking very much at not so much the visual arts, but more the structure, the formal structure of minimalist music like Terry Riley, Lamont Young, or taking it further back to someone like Eric Satie and his Vexations, where you have, in Vexations, you have one short piece of music played for about 24 hours every time by a different pianist, but the exact same notes. So here, this kind of continuous room with a continuous light source. These are some light boxes, Lightbox Works. I'm just going to hold on this one for a minute. That's the moment of the booster rocket separating as I think Apollo 1 was leaving Earth. Migration. And these are, this is taken from my iPhone in case any of you are curious how these images blow up. It's kind of nice. I really like this quality. It's so soft. But this is one of the most recent film works I've done. the title's Migration, and for the work, I wanted to kind of create this trajectory across the continental U.S. and begin it in the industrial Northeast, areas like Pittsburgh, and eventually cross Midwest to the West Coast, entirely inside motel and hotel rooms, from Holiday Inn, Days Inn, Best Western, all these kind of serial places where you have this ability to wake up and not know where you are. And I wanted to, in each of these rooms separately, to introduce a separate animal from the American landscape. So these creatures would, in this almost Fluxus performance-like way, they would kind of enter into these spaces, and it was very wide spectrum. You had like a western mountain lion going into a room that appeared to be like a Days Inn, and just kind of runs in, that takes his pregnant pause, scans the space, looks at the bed, and attacks, and attacks, and attacks, and attacks for like 10 minutes, and like the feathers are just flying, and the sheets are just being ripped, and it's gnawing on everything imaginable. And it was this kind of incredibly beautiful crystal moment of liberation. And the piece would have certain moments like that were just impossible to be scripted, while there are other moments where you would have another animal that might be very docile or passive or surreal, like the beaver. And the beaver in itself was kind of a very neutral creature that would, the beaver chose the bathroom, and this bathroom had kind of hot running water in this tub, and the beaver kind of like sauntered past the coffee percolator and slithered into the water and started swimming in figure eights. And then, I was kind of in the ceiling with the camera looking down, the 35 millimeter camera, and I started to see these small hands come out of its giant furry body and like rubbing its ears and head. And it was just one of these moments that was just so fascinating, where you feel this, you just kind of see everything as one continuous life cycle. Here's the owl. This is at the Carnegie International in Pittsburgh. The show ran for, I think, something like 8 months or something like that. It came down only several months ago. And so the piece was installation on both sides of the museum, and then it came to New York, and it was at 303 Gallery in New York. And in New York, it was a series of billboards. During the trip, I became very obsessed with the formal qualities of different billboards and kind of taking notes. So at the studio, we designed our own, taking the specs that we found most favorable and kind of scaled them down by about 35%, and they became the projection screens for the work, and kind of stood freestanding within the gallery exhibition space. This image that I passed here, one night we turned it into a event, a happening, with several different live performers. This is White Rainbow, doing kind of like live interpretations, live sonic interpretations to the screens above. And what have we here? This is it. There is some film, but I don't know how we are on time or what you want to do. You want some film? Okay. You requested it. Okay, film please. Oh, and please make it loud. Can you turn off the light? questions. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The idea of the generic, the recognizable, almost like a subconscious recognizable, but without specificity. And that is something which I find that really these projects they are divided almost into two camps. The projects which are so site-specific and so much about a place, like some of the earlier works which I'd showed slides of Diamond Sea or Eraser or Monsoon. And then other pieces where, like Electric Earth, the Whitney, it's a piece where I wanted it to kind of be in every place and in no place at the same time, you know. And I like that slipperiness. So it's in your mind. Oh yeah, go for it. Okay, thanks for coming.